Hey, it's me again, and wanted to do yet another album review. So this is continuing the George Harrison releases in order that they were released, and that brings us to December 20th, 1971, with the concert for Bangladesh. It's my original copy that I got back around 1977, and I've had it since. Got a little bit of wear and tear on it, even though I don't play this album very often. But much like the All Things Must Pass box set, this comes in a similar package, even though it doesn't have the hinged opening like All Things. It just this box opens, got orange cover with the picture there on the cover, blank backside. And so people at this point must have thought George is just going to release triple albums forever, but that didn't turn out to be the case. But George was riding very high at this point. He had a number one album with All Things Must Pass, and this album went to number one in England and went to number two on the Billboard charts in America. Though on another chart in America, the Cashbox chart, I forget which one, it went to number one. But anyway, one and two, and big seller, won a Grammy for Album of the Year, I believe, or one of those Grammy categories. I don't pay attention to the Grammys, they're crap, but it's nice that it won a award there. So, Bangladesh was it Pakistan East and West, and they were split and separated about 1,000 miles of India between them. They didn't get along, and the East sort of dominated. I mean, the West sort of dominated the East, and the East had some elections and got some power and thought they were going to be able to work things out, but the people in the West went over there and started killing people, and people started streaming into it. A big mess, big cataclysmic human tragedy mess. Ravi Shankar, who was from there, was friends with George, of course. They, sitar teacher and so forth and so on, and musical buddies. And he told George what was going on, hoping that George could give him some ways to raise money, because India was trying to help these people as much as they could with food and vaccinations for cholera and so forth and so on, but they were just getting overwhelmed with millions of people coming in across the border to escape the war and tragedy and so forth and so on. I think Robbie was at first just expecting George to give him some tips on how to raise some money, or tell him some people that he might get together to get a concert to raise some money. George jumped in and said, "Well, why don't I just do a concert, and I'll get some of my musical buddies together, and we'll do a concert." And so they did on August 1st, 1971. Two concerts were held that same day at Madison Square Garden. This was put together really quickly, and George sort of got people lined up pretty quick. So you got George, you got Ringo, you got Billy Preston, Eric Clapton, members of Badfinger, Leon Russell, and I don't know, a bunch of other people. I think those are the big heavy hitters, though. And so got the concert going. George said, I'm pretty sure I've heard, I might be incorrect at this, that the Rolling Stones were asked, or at least Mick and or Keith were asked to participate, and didn't want to or couldn't, or I'm not even sure if that's accurate, but it seemed pretty sure I read that somewhere, that they were asked to participate but just couldn't. Kind of a shame that that didn't happen. John and Paul were asked to participate. Paul didn't want to because of all the acrimony of the recent Beatles split and the legal battle still going on, which is a shame, because you could have had all four Beatles on stage and had a little Beatle reunion, even though, it probably would have been a one-off deal, but still would have been better than nothing. And this being right after the Beatles, they still would have worked, I think. Personally, I'm glad the Beatles never did get back together later, but I mean, something like this, like right after the fact, could have been something unique and wonderful. I don't know. Maybe it's good that Paul didn't, because he probably would have wanted to run the show and dominate things and driven George crazy, which is one of the reasons the Beatles broke apart anyway. But still, it would have been nice if it would have worked out. You could have had Paul sing, you know, "Backseat of My Car" in Another Day or something. Would have been cool. Uh, George asked John to participate, and John was up for it, but George said, one stipulation: no damn Yoko. And from what I've read, John said okay, but then, uh, Yoko got wind of that, and that was the end of that. So John had to pull out of there. I guess in that George was thinking, if I'm going to make these people sit through 30 minutes of damn sitar music, I'm sure as hell not going to compound that with having them have to sit through the screeching, caterwauling kook lady. And good on him. But it's really a shame because it would have been cool to have John there playing Instant Karma, have him playing something off the Plastic Ono Band, and you would have had the four Beatles there, so maybe they could have done at least a song or two. They could have ended the show by singing "Love Me Do." That would have been great. So, but that didn't happen, but you do have all these great people. Bob Dylan was till the last minute. Didn't know whether he's going to show up or not. I think he only played one of the two shows. Could be wrong on that, but he kind of kept everyone in suspense and sort of walked out last minute and played. George wanted him, the other story I've heard is, wanted him to play Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, which is off his second album, Dylan's second album, Freewheeling Bob Dylan, which Dylan didn't want to do at first and sort of got in an argument and asked George if he was planning to play "I Want to Hold Your Hand" or not. But he gave in and played it, and so that's good. So, what else on this? You got the triple album, like I said. Here's the, basically they all the same as far as the labels. Funny that you got side 4 and side 3. That one works out, but here you got side 2 and side 5, and here you got side 6 and side 1. So it's a little confusing if you're wanting to play these at home. You got the box, like I said, pretty cool box set and cover. You also got this really cool book that's like a 63-page book of pictures of the show and information about the show. And there's some kind of interesting information on Bangladesh, the country, and the situation that was going on then. You have some good pictures of George. He finally got a haircut from that mop he had in the All Things Must Pass days, but still has that beard there. But looking pretty good overall, though. And then you got some Billy Preston pictures, and he has a turn in the show. And there's one picture that's, without going through, here's kind of a neat George introducing the different members of the band on stage. Kind of a cool picture the way they laid that out. And the one that I really liked in here, if I can find it, is I don't know, let's see. I'll keep looking for it. But anyway, it's a live album. I've never been here it is. That's a cool picture. Would have made a good poster to come with the album, I think. Oh, Bobby Z and George there. So this isn't one I play very often because I'm not a huge fan of live albums. A few exceptions to that, as I've said 100 times, but by and large, live albums, I would rather, most cases, just listen to the studio versions of the songs when I want to hear them. So I'm not going to go through all the songs individually. for the most part. But side one of the album is probably one that was the least played when people bought this. It's got George and Ravi Shankar doing introductions to the night show or the day's show, and then it's Ravi Shankar and some other Indian musicians playing something called Bangla Dune, which is 16 plus minutes of sitar music. Uh, Sitar music, I appreciate the artistry and that these are very accomplished musicians and I give them all the credit. I don't mind it in little short bursts like Wonderwall music, the first George album, which has the Indian and the Western music sort of mixed up, and they're little. Most of the songs on there are like 1 to 3 or 4 minutes long. So I don't mind it in that context. I don't mind it in the Beatles context with things like Norwegian Wood and Within You Without You and The Inner Light, or something like Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones, where the sitar is sort of, so that's not really Indian music because the sitar is just sort of used as a curiosity to add color to the song. But when it comes to sitting through 15 or 20 minutes of this stuff, it's like I said, I appreciate the artistry, but it's just not for me. So if you really like Indian music, this might be the highlight of the album for you, side one. If you don't, then probably best to skip it. Might want to listen to it once just to hear it. Then we go basically the George songs. There's something, Here Comes the Sun, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps as far as Beatles songs. Everything else is George solo stuff, and being that really the only album he had out at that time was All Things Must Pass. They're all Things Must Pass songs. Sadly, he doesn't break out anything from this album, which would have been really cool. And by the way, Joe, me and Mr. Mayo, you were asking the other day if it's electronic sound or electronic sounds. Well, there's your answer. It's sound singular. Anyway, Ringo does It Don't Come Easy, does pretty well with that. Billy Preston does That's the Way God Planned It. That's a really, really good highlight of the album. And who else is you got? The Dylan. Yeah, Dylan hadn't played at that point in America in about 5 years, even though he had played some concerts in England just the year before. But he comes out with Hard Rain's Gonna Fall and Mr. Tambourine Man and whatever. Takes a Train, Takes a Lot to Laugh, and also Dylan set's pretty good. The George stuff is pretty good. It's pretty darn good, actually. I just would rather listen to it. Personally, I would rather listen to the studio versions on All Things Must Pass of these songs. Leon Russell is just a waste of space. It's a shame that they gave him the spotlight and didn't have some more George songs or some more Dylan or even another Ringo or Billy Preston song. What else about this? This was the first I don't know if this is the first, but it was the first big one or notable rock concert to raise money for a specific cause. Kind of probably was inspired in spirit by things like the Monterey Pop Festival and Woodstock and those sort of big festival things that happened in the late 60s. And of course, later on, Live Aid and things like that down the road that would raise money. There was all sorts of, through the years, legal mumbo jumbo wrangling about actually getting the money over to Bangladesh to help the people. I don't know if all the money eventually made it over there or not, but I think a good portion of it did. But just got tied up in all sorts of political, legal mumbo jumbo nonsense. There was also a delay in the album because you had all these people from different record labels on here, and it took forever for the record labels to work it out instead of just saying, hey, screw business, this is to help people that are starving to death and desperate. Let's just put the album out and get the money for them. But you know how corporate idiots are. So that's why this was it's a shame because it came out on December 20th of 71 in America, like I said, so it's like 5 days before Christmas, and the original plan was to have this out in November so it could have sold well for the Christmas holidays. But anyway, so what else? Yeah, it's a good album. It's not one that I listen to very often. But as far as the live album goes, it's pretty good. It's more the purpose of it and the spirit behind it is what's more important than the actual music here, which everything's performed pretty well. Um, I don't know who else is on here. Eric Clapton, which is damn weird dynamic between George Harrison and the third best guitarist from the Yardbirds. Because here you got Harrison's married to Patty Boyd, who's hot as hell, and then Clapton's sniffing around her and wanting her, and George is just like, okay, and hey, come over and play guitar with me and let's be friends. Where if it was me, I'd be chasing him I'd be going after him with a baseball bat, but I don't know. I guess it worked for them, so whatever. But this is also what kind of Clapton's guitar playing is still pretty interesting at this point, with him having played on All Things Must Pass album and Derek and the Dominoes album, which is okay. But then after that, his guitar playing just, I mean, he's still a good guitar player, but it just becomes like the most boring guitar player on the planet and never really did anything of interest or note really after that. But before that, he was good in the Blues Breakers and in Cream, and he was okay in the Yardbirds. He was no Jimmy Page or Jeff Beck, but I don't know. So that's an interesting thing. So yeah. Anyway, enough about that. Shame it wasn't a Beatles reunion, but it would have been an incredible concert to go to. They made a movie of this. I've never seen it, believe it or not. Remember one time years and years ago, it was playing at a midnight movie, and I was going to go see it, and something came up, and I wasn't able to. And it's out. I think it's out on DVD and so forth. I just one of those things I never gotten around to that I need to one of these days. But yeah, George was still the most successful solo Beatle at this point, and riding high that wouldn't last for long, but it was pretty great while it did. And I'll give this overall like a 7, I guess. You know, good cause. The music is pretty solid. If you like live albums, you might really enjoy this more than I do. But yeah, it's pretty solid music, and it's all right. 7 highlights being George, Bob Dylan, and Billy Preston, and Ringo does a good job. But yeah, 7 for that, and we'll be back with another George album sometime. Probably not today, but maybe. We'll see. Maybe not. We'll see. Maybe not.